Okay, so this has been discussed for some time now. Another important issue for Hawaii, and now with 100% renewables as our state goal and our policy, we need to assess whether LNG should be imported as a transition or bridge fuel. We look to our expert panel and Dwayne Shimagawa, energy reporter for Pacific Business News, to inform us so we can make an informed decision that will benefit us all. A warm welcome for Dwayne Shimagawa.
All right, thanks Jay and the Hawaii Energy Policy Forum for allowing me to moderate this great panel. Can I get a round of applause for the panel today? Couldn't think of a better group of guys to talk about LNG and the future of that fuel here in Hawaii. You know, as Jay alluded to, the state is, moving closer and closer to 100% renewable energy future. You got Governor Ige's now mandate that's signed that has us reaching there at 2045. There's this so-called cheaper and cleaner alternative that's being looked at as a replacement, liquefied natural gas. To date, there are currently 2 proposals to ship in LNG to Hawaii, one by Hawaii Gas, which is already shipping in this type of fuel in small amounts. Then there's Hawaiian Electric, which originally planned to start shipments in 2017, but because of such factors as the price of a barrel going south and the reallocation of capital, HECO's LNG project has been delayed until 2019, which ironically is the same time period that Hawaii Gas hopes to begin bulk shipments. Both Hawaii Gas and HECO have signed an agreement to work with one another on this project, but it remains to be seen, if this agreement will continue as we go further and further along with this process. Both projects claim hundreds of millions in dollars of savings, and LNG is a cleaner fuel, but it is still a fossil fuel like oil. One thing's for sure, it's that these 3 gentlemen, they're well qualified, knowledgeable to talk about this issue. It's a big issue here in Hawaii that we all need to talk more about, and we'll definitely dig into the issues here. We have Ron Cox, Senior Vice President of Power Supply for Hawaiian Electric. He'll give you points in support of the implementation of liquefied natural gas. We have Jeff Mikulina, Executive Director of the Blue Planet Foundation. He'll give you reasons why LNG isn't such a good idea for Hawaii. And then we have Murray Clay, Managing Partner for Ulupono Initiative. He'll assess the options and give us more insight on LNG. So we'll start off with, did you guys pick numbers in the back? We'll start off with Ron Cox then.
Thank you very much, Dwayne. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to start off by just noting that I think all of us up here on the podium and all of you are all on the same goal, have the same goal, and that's 100% cost-effective renewable future, and do it as quickly as we can. That's the good news. And as even the governor mentioned this morning, we lead the nation. We're far ahead on rooftop solar and almost any other metric you can imagine. So we want to continue that and extend that. That's our goal. And we think LNG is a way to do that. We think liquefied natural gas is a cleaner, cheaper, more stable priced fuel that can be a bridge to replace oil in that fossil fuel component as we move to that 100% renewable future. And we think we can do that by while minimizing the on-island infrastructure investment. EPA regulations drive us to make a change. Status quo isn't an option for us. We need to change to a cleaner fuel. The options are cleaner liquid fuel, oil-based, or a cleaner fuel like gas. An additional important side benefit is having liquefied natural gas here in higher quantities also makes it possible to use that in the transportation sector, something that I know the state is really focused on starting going forward, and how to drive down carbon emissions coming out of that area as well. That was actually the slide I was supposed to be talking to. So how do we see the future? The future still has fossil fuel in it for quite a number of years ahead. Thermal generation is going to be around for quite some time because it provides that stabilizing, firm, flexible component to managing our grid reliably. The question is, as I see it, should we use cleaner, cheaper, more stable price gas instead of oil in that fossil fuel component until we can get to that future where we have cost-effective, reliable, renewable energy? And as our gas use declines over the next few years, it is still possible and available to use that fuel in the transportation sector as well. The Energy Information Administration has projected that by 2040, nearly 60% of the gas demand will originate in areas outside the power sector. So it seems to align with the thinking that transportation use will grow. So what does the pricing look like? 2019. This is indicative pricing, not based on any firm contracts at this point. We continue to work on those. But it's representative of where we think we will be, or very close to it. Gas is cheaper and cleaner still than oil, even with the recent drop in prices. I mentioned status quo isn't an option. Continuing to use the heavy fuel oil, the low sulfur fuel oil that's shown up there, isn't an option as we comply with new air regulations that demand cleaner emissions. Not only is LNG cheaper and cleaner, it also provides a little more stability in our pricing. One of the effects of oil and the volatility of oil is when, let's say the price of oil doubles, that number on the right two bars up there double, because it's all a variably priced commodity that we're buying. If we're buying gas, if you notice, much of the price of gas delivered here would be fixed. It's in the supply chain. The actual gas commodity itself is relatively small. So if you double the price of, say, diesel, you're paying $36 an MMBTU. You double the price of natural gas, the commodity that you liquefy to deliver here, you're paying maybe $19.50. That's a much easier impact to absorb for customers and the economy. Well, that's great for 2019, but what does it look like beyond 2019? The forecasts that we watch, and they're consistent, all say that natural gas will be more stable and lower priced than oil over the long haul. We generally rely on the Energy Information Administration for our forecasts, but in this case we decided to take a slightly different look. We decided to rely on the energy market forward future pricing forecast to look at the price volatility. The analysis concludes here that, like the Energy Information, our traditional analysis, that LNG will not only be lower in price than oil in the future, but less volatile. The lines that are solid are the estimated prices for oil and gas, and then the lighter lines with all the movement in them is the estimated volatility. And so what you see is that the volatility of oil is much greater, and the bands on those higher and lower lines represent sort of a 90% confidence that oil will be priced and gas will be priced within that area going forward into the future. That's understandable when you look at the absolute revolution in the production of gas on the U.S. mainland and in North America. While the oil markets are still going to be subject to global turmoil, political instability, changes in Middle Eastern countries, oil policies, etc. So we think the North American gas market is a better option for us in the future. I've mentioned that it's cleaner. Okay, so how much cleaner is it? These numbers look at what the reductions in emissions would be at our Kahi generating station if we transition from oil to gas. If you look at the Toxic Release Inventory Report, a report we submit annually to the Environmental Protection Agency, you'd see that the Kahi generating station is the largest emitter of toxic emissions in the state as a result of the oil we burn. Sulfur dioxide goes way down if you shift to gas. There's virtually no sulfur in gas. Nitrogen oxides is kept by a third, and the carbon dioxide emissions are significantly reduced. It's the equivalent of taking 49,000 cars off the road if you switch from oil to gas. So we think that makes a lot of sense, and the numbers are compelling. But the EPA thinks that also. Gina McCarthy, the head of the EPA, chief administrator, was speaking at the Columbia University Center on Global Energy Policy back in April, where she said, and I quote, "Fracking has changed the game for me in terms of how the energy system is working. The inexpensive gas that's being produced has allowed us to make leaps and bounds in progress on the air pollution side, and frankly, to make the Clean Power Plan," unquote. And that Clean Power Plan is the EPA's national plan to reduce greenhouse gases. So to conclude, we believe LNG is a good fit for Hawaii's clean energy future. It provides that bridge fuel, that transition that allows us to make those investments in the grid in the future at lower cost to customers. That's going to modernize the grid and allow us to do much of what you heard discussed in that last panel: use of energy storage, customers having more control over their energy use. For us, the focus is on how do we make that transition at least cost. We're about trying to save customers money as we make that change. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron, for all that information. Now, I don't know if before we go to Jeff, I don't know if you guys knew this, but before he became this energy, warrior, he wanted to be a journalist, actually. So, Jeff, I'm glad you made that choice. Keep doing what you're doing. Next up, we got Jeff Mikolina, and his position obviously will be why LNG is not good for Hawaii. So, Jeff?
Yeah, well, full disclosure, when I was a sophomore in high school, I was on the engineering side of the campus, and all the cool kids were on the liberal arts and sciences. And I don't know if any of you were at colleges like this, but all you wanted to do was be on the other side of campus. So that was the impetus. LNG, worth the price at any cost. In the fall of 2011, students in Professor Katie Kiernan's seismology course at the University of Oklahoma buried portable seismograph stations around the campus stadium in anticipation of a football game between the Sooners and Texas A&M later in the week. The plan was to see if the students could discern the roar of 82,000 fans after a touchdown, compare that to, say, a passing train. And Oklahoma is the perfect place for this because Oklahoma doesn't really have earthquakes. But on 2:12 a.m., the day of the game, 12 hours before the game started, on November 5th, 2011, their instruments started going off. And what they were picking up was an earthquake about an hour's drive away in Prague, Oklahoma, earthquake of 4.8. This was unexpected because, again, earthquakes were rare in Oklahoma. But since the shale fracking revolution began, earthquakes are a way of life now in Oklahoma. It used to be about 2 per year of magnitude 3.0 and larger, but 2008, it jumped up there to 20 in 2009, doubled again. Last year, they had 375 earthquakes above 3.0, and this year they're expecting over 800 earthquakes. The Prague earthquake was significant, particularly because these folks just weren't prepared for this sort of rumbling under their feet. At least 16 homes were destroyed, and the spire on the historic Benedictine Hall at St. Gregory's collapsed. There's no question that the increase in earthquakes is being driven by the gas activities in Oklahoma. In fact, here's William Ellsworth of USGS saying we can say with virtual certainty that the increased seismicity in Oklahoma has to do with recent changes. There have been 23 peer-reviewed publications talking about this relationship, supporting that assertion, and none that have challenged it. Cheap gas is coming with increasing costs, and these costs are what we're building our bridge transition upon, if we look at it that way. The footprint for this extraction that's happening across the country is enormous. And the impacts to nearby air and water resources have motivated some communities and states to actually pass bans. And 2 states have that. New York and New Jersey have passed bans to fracking activities, and others are looking to ban it. We're just starting to learn about the impacts of, when you inject essentially this soup of chemicals to fracture the shale rock to extract this gas and produce billions of gallons of wastewater, what impacts that might actually have on local communities. And understandably, communities are rising up and opposed to this. Denton, Texas, for example, passed a ban overwhelmingly on the ballot a few years back. But the oil and gas lobby is powerful, and after that town of Denton passed this, the state passed a ban on banning fracking across the state. So the choices that we're making here in Hawaii might actually contribute to activities over the objection of those communities. That's how powerful this industry is. So we have to reflect on this as we make these choices, as we debate over how many pennies cheaper it may or may not be for a limited amount of time. Are these impacts worth the cost? Are we willing to bear this responsibility for impacts happening elsewhere? Okay, but we know that communities, they'll object to anything. They'll object to wind turbines. Maybe we need to just use climate as our North Star and say, let's go for the cleanest resources that we have on hand. But let's look at this question of climate, because this comes up a lot, and it being a clean energy resource. Folks have questioned this, and it might be that gas is no cleaner based on this fracking approach than other fossil fuels. And this is shocking to hear, because we all know that just burning that hydrocarbon at the burner is far cleaner, just as Ron shared, and there's no disputing that. But it's the extraction, it's the production, the transportation, liquefaction. They're all opportunities for leakage there. And in fact, the state's recent report that examined using LNG as a compressed natural gas in vehicles, they looked at this life cycle emissions, and they concluded that because of the high global warming potential of methane, even low rates of leakage could result in an increase in greenhouse gas emissions compared to gasoline. So we really have to have our eyes wide open and think critically about what are the real life cycle impacts of all of our fuels, but particularly if we're touting this as a greenhouse gas friendly fuel, we have to have our eyes wide open. But then isn't this what regulations are for? I mean, come on, we can just crack down on these frackers and really come up with the right sort of regulation to make sure we minimize leakage, keep it under 3% or whatever the magic number is that makes it a clean fuel. But let's take a look at this industry. It's a little bit of the Wild West. Many of the operators are highly leveraged, anticipating a future stream of income from gas. The recent collapse in the oil price has driven a lot of these guys out of business, and it's really, it is the Wild West. Here's an Economist article talking about comparing these to kind of your father's extraction business of the oil industry, saying if conventional oil firms are like ranching, shale is a rodeo. Do we really want to leave our climate up to a rodeo? And do we really think that any regulations that we promulgate are going to have an impact across these thousands of wells across the country? The unintended consequences of shifting to imported LNG not only occur away from our shores, but we might have some impacts here locally. By providing a source of low-cost gas in Hawaii, we might be hastening the departure of large commercial customers, such as hotels and resorts, as they decide to install, say, combined heat and cycle facilities or fuel cells or some other technology using this resource, maybe turning the LNG into hydrogen and using it that way, but nonetheless departing the grid and leaving the grid with fewer and fewer customers to bear the entire cost of the grid. These large customers could also provide storage and demand response and other solutions to our large, if we're going down this route of having a functioning, renewably powered grid. We want these guys tied to the grid. As they leave, if we provide a low-cost fuel source, it could cause some disruptions that we really haven't fully considered. Plus, they might be 100% fossil powered as our grid becomes more and more renewable because of the RPS standards. We could be in 2050 having resorts powered by 100% fossil fuel because they've sunk the infrastructure, the cost into that infrastructure. Now, the costs of natural gas extraction are high, but we seem to be operating under the assumption that the price is worthwhile. And the price is what matters most to people. And in fact, the survey done earlier today pointed to that. Bringing down the cost of energy was kind of the primary concern in that survey. And we all seem to come back to, we got to reduce the costs. Kyle suggested earlier that we should go to the customers and ask them what really matters, not just what we think matters to them, but what are they really concerned about. So Blue Planet did that a couple of months ago. We hired Market Trends Pacific to coordinate a broad statewide survey on energy issues. We asked over 600 households statewide, so it was a fairly good sample. In one case, we wanted to find out how customers view price. Does price take precedent above everything, above all other issues, environment, health, community impact, or is there some other balance? And what we found was pretty surprising. About half the respondents said, we need to balance price with these other impacts, environmental, health, and whatnot. A quarter of them responded saying, price is important, but it's just under impacts the environment and health and what have you. A full 20% said, no, price is at the bottom. We need to look at these other impacts first and consider that. But here's what's most shocking. When given these 4 options, only 5% of respondents said price above all else. And yet we seem to be operating that, price first and then fill in the rest. Who are we speaking to when we say that? It might only be 5% of the customers that are really looking critically at what are all the impacts of our energy choices. I'll end with one more story. To bring LNG to Hawaii, we need the infrastructure to liquefy and ship the gas, likely on the West Coast, although it's unclear where. And siting these LNG terminals isn't easy. Recently, the large Petronas, the Malaysian company, proposed a LNG terminal right at the mouth of the Skeena River in British Columbia. They wanted to bring gas that they were fracking up in Alberta down a pipeline coming down the river to a facility they wanted to build there at the mouth of the river. The challenge was there's an indigenous tribe that owns the land on the island they wanted to build it on, Lax Kw'alaams. And so they approached the tribe, the Lax Kw'alaams, and they said, can we build this facility? It's going to provide jobs. It's going to bring economic benefit. It's overall positive. This tribe has 3,000 people. They responded, no, you can't build your terminal on our land. So Petronas regrouped, and they came back, and they said, tell you what, we will give you $1 billion, actually $1.15 billion, if we can put our facility on your island. They took a vote, and they unanimously said no. They denied it. They won't even take $1 billion, 3,000 people in this tribe, because they understood the impacts, potential impacts on the salmon run for tribes upstream and the change of the culture and what have you. So we really have to think about, as we make choices in Hawaii for this very short term, what are the costs? What are the implications of those decisions? Who are we impacting? And just out of sight doesn't mean that they're not occurring somewhere. And so I hope we can approach this with eyes wide open, and like the students in Professor Kiernan's seismology course, really begin to understand what these impacts of this fracking boom, and this is what's causing this whole discussion, and this is why we've been talking about this the last 4 years. It's because of the shale revolution. And 3 years ago, had we taken that commitment when we were back here at Clean Energy Day and oil was over $100 and it was going to be a 30% savings, we kind of would have been caught with our pants down. We've had some time now to look at this, think about the impacts, and we can make a choice in Hawaii to accelerate our clean energy transition and get to where we want to be as soon as possible. So I'll leave this for questions. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jeff. Great points there. I especially like the survey asking customers, what they want in their energy. Next up, we have Murray Clay of Ulupono Initiative. He'll be assessing the options and making sense out of all of this. Right, Murray?
Hope so. Aloha. So as the last speaker of the day, I've got 3 jobs. I've got to keep you awake, not get busted by the timekeeper, and hopefully provide a data-driven, neutral analysis around this question. Okay, so normally we frame this question just as the panel is entitled, clean versus cheap. The problem with this, it's a little bit too narrow. It implies the question is strictly between environmentalists on one side and economists on the other side. It's like the ultimate grudge match, economists and environmentalists, who will prevail? It's like all you can care about is the environment or money. There's no sort of combination allowed. So that's not the way it really is. I want to broaden that a little bit to say it's about clean and stable or cheap and volatile. It's sort of like some of the dating decisions you may have had. Clean and stable or cheap and volatile? Take your own. Sorry, I had to do it. Got to keep you awake. Okay, so the problem that we've had with this is in having this discussion, we have not done a good job of estimating fuel price volatility. We have some very simple approaches that have been used. We don't do a good job of really showing the true probability and impact around this question. Okay, so what I'm going to do is introduce Monte Carlos. We don't have the time to go through all the technical details, but I will say it gives a more full, more unbiased, objective view of volatility. It talks about probabilities. It runs thousands and thousands of iterations based on past volatility to say how likely is it for things to jump up or down a lot or a little. It's just a very robust way of doing that. Other nice things about it, it's easily verified by others. I can give my model to anyone here and you can type in some different numbers, try some different things, push the button, and you'll get the same exact answer if you use the same inputs. It's easily updated, so when fuel prices change, you just put in the new fuel prices and run it again. It uses generic software that anyone can get. It's an Excel add-in in the case of the one that I used, and it's used broadly. So the EPA, Department of Energy, Fortune 500 companies, and utilities throughout really the rest of the world use this as a tool to estimate volatility, although we don't really seem to do this much here in Hawaii. So we have 3 questions to consider, and I'll give you a simulation for each one of these in just a minute. So the first one is the simple one of oil versus natural gas. I think most people probably have their minds made up in many ways in this, but I'll show you some analysis there. And if it's natural gas, this came up in a seminar, I think the seminar group put on a few months ago, on what do you index your natural gas to. You're going to index it to the price of oil and diesel, for example, or you're going to index it to the Henry Hub, which is just the natural gas index on the mainland. And the last question that we'll look at, hopefully, is what is the priority for future generation? We're going to focus on, renewable energy, or are we going to focus on cheapest cost, maybe LNG? So what's the priority? Although the state has already made an answer, we'll still look at it anyway. Okay, so before I start this thing running, I got to explain a few things. There's the host of assumptions behind this is pretty broad. The one thing I will say is the vast majority, something like 95% of the data that went into this came from the utility itself, DBED, and the PUC. I didn't make up any of this. It just came from publicly filed documents put into this model. There are some assumptions that still go into this. So the simplified assumption, you see that blue line drop after about 5 years. So just to keep things simple, I just assumed we have the status quo in terms of energy for today. So the oil and diesel and renewables that are in existence right now today, we continue to have with no change for 5 years. And then we just assume that in 5 years, it wouldn't happen all at once, of course, but you just assume that in 5 years you switch to the new portfolio, whether that's natural gas or renewables. It's sort of the new future portfolio we switch to 5 years out and then hold that for 30 years. And so we're looking at the impact of that over time. So you won't be able to follow this because this is going to go through about 1,000 iterations, but just look at the difference between the red line, which is oil, and the blue line, which is natural gas. This also gives you a kind of a gut reaction to what volatility really feels like. That's your power bill. That's a 600 kilowatt power bill that you're seeing right there. And you notice the y-axis has to keep rescaling because sometimes it goes up over $1,000 a month. So that's usually far off in the future, but still, that's kind of what it feels like. And you notice that the red line, oil, is normally higher than the natural gas line. Okay. So now this is that question number 2. What should we index our natural gas to? The red line is indexed to oil and diesel. And the price talk that I've been hearing, I'm certainly not an oil and gas expert. I'm not trying to certainly present myself as one. But the price talk that I've been hearing is that if you got reasonable amounts of natural gas, you could get a 15% discount to oil and diesel and just have that fixed guaranteed discount so you're always better than oil and diesel on one hand. Or the blue line is you index to Henry Hub. And I think it looks like from what I saw in Ron's presentation, I don't think the numbers I'm using are that different from his because again, the price talk that I've heard is that if it was Henry Hub, you'd probably add about $10 per million BTUs as an adder to that. That's where all that fixed stuff I think that Ron was talking about. So Henry Hub plus $10 per million BTUs is the blue line. So you can see there's not always a clear winner, but I think as you watch that, you'll see the blue line, the Henry Hub line, does tend to be lower, and it does tend to be more stable, partly because of the points that Ron made that $10, if you assume that $10 is truly fixed, then a big chunk of that gas price is sort of fixed. Now, if some of that shipping cost is actually tied to current fuel prices, then it becomes more volatile than what this is showing here. But in general, you see that Henry Hub is cheaper actually about 80% of the time. And our last one, we're going to look at the current generation status quo renewable energy. So just take the renewable energy, all the PPAs, everything that exists today, hold it constant over time, and switch to natural gas at that 5-year point. That's the red line. Or the blue line is, let's actually really increase those renewable energies. So what do I mean by high renewable energy? I took the DBED projects that are on that DBED renewable energy project tracking list and just assume the ones that are supposed to be done by 2020 are done by 2020. If you're curious, that would mean we go from the status quo of roughly 21% renewable to something more like 47%. So in very round numbers, it's kind of like 20 up to 50% renewable. So 20% renewable is the red line, 50% renewable is the blue line. Both have natural gas in this particular case. And as is often the case with volatility, there's not one thing that normally wins all the time, but you talk about probabilities. When you run the probabilities, you'll find that more often than not, the blue line, the high renewable line, is better, less volatile, and cheaper than the red line. You can see sometimes there's not a lot of difference, sometimes there's big difference. So it's really hard for people's minds, certainly myself included. That was 1,000 iterations. Because of the speed of the computer, you probably saw like every 50th one. You don't really see 1,000. It's just your brain doesn't work that fast, at least mine doesn't. But how do you think about that? It's sort of a lot seeing these lines dance around to really sort of internalize that. So I try to put it all in one slide here at the end. So these green bars are 90% probability bands. So this is the 90% probability that your fuel bill, your electric bill, your 600 kilowatt electric bill will fall within that band. So you'll see oil and diesel, oil index gas, Henry Hub, and then high renewable energy. So oil and diesel, there's a 5% chance, for example, that your fuel bill could be over $616 a month. There's a 5% chance, on the other hand, it could be under $140 a month. This is 10 years, I guess the slide says, this is 10 years after you switch to gas, because you want the simulation to give that volatility a chance to work. So 10 years post making the gas decision, this is where you end up. Now for oil index gas, with that fixed 15% discount, you could be $425 a month down to $139 a month. And if you're curious why those average lines aren't in the middle, it's because there's that fixed part of your bill that isn't tied to fuel. And of course, you can't go below this minimum fixed price. The Henry Hub index gas plus $10 per million BTUs is the assumption I used. You could be $245 a month down to $152. And Henry Hub plus the higher renewables, for example, would be $215 down to $154. So that should give you an idea of how that works. Now, what's not included in that is I haven't included any kind of future, like if there was a carbon tax someday, or if there was other price increases on the fossil fuel side. None of that's modeled in here. And any kind of volatility piece included in that $10 per million BTUs is also not in here. That would make those 3 bars on the left all grow bigger. But the simple, although I'm supposed to say neutral, I think this slide somewhat speaks for itself. But the most important point I want to make in closing is that if we're going to make a decision about assets that are going to be around for 30 years, we need to do a much, much better job of estimating volatility. Show people what their bills could look like. Don't base it on an EIA forecast, which, by the way, our oil prices here in Hawaii were 3.8 times the EIA forecast they made for this time back in 2000. So they make these forecasts over 30 years, they can go horribly wrong. So let's look at volatility, let's look at the full probabilities and have a rational discussion about the chances are that you become happy versus sad over that choice. Thank you.
All right, thank Murray. Good analysis there, and I think for all of us, we want lower bills, and we want to take into account the environment. So I think this is definitely a well first topic that we need to keep on talking about. And just to be clear, the Hawaii Public Utilities Commission still needs to rule on the HECO and Hawaii gas plans. So it's by no means a done deal. So the discussion will continue just like we're having today. So now we're going to go to some questions for our panelists. And for those of you who are live sifting or haven't had the chance to get in on the action, this is your last chance. This is the last panel to ask questions of our panelists. So our first question, does Hawaiian Electric consider methane emissions that occur during the LNG life cycle? So obviously, that's a question for Ron.
Right. We're sensitive to methane emissions. We understand the importance of minimizing methane emissions. So does the EPA. They regulate that. Studies show that there's not a lot of rigor and accuracy in the way those are measured today, but the bulk of the analysis says that that's improving as the industry matures, and it's important that it mature and improve, because without that kind of rigor around the production side, then you may not get the greenhouse gas benefit that you seek. But what we see today is that that benefit is there, and clearly the EPA believes that also, because they're hinging their greenhouse gas reduction plan based on the use of natural gas to replace some of the higher carbon emitting technology and fuels that are out there today.
All right, next question. Isn't LNG a high cost for a short-term benefit versus a long-term renewable energy benefit? I guess let's have Jeff chime in on this one.
Maybe Ron wants to take this one. If I'm reading this correctly, I would agree. I mean, we just have to have our eyes wide open, particularly for the infrastructure costs. Again, I think the burden of proof is very high on those who want to build new fossil fuel infrastructure while we're rapidly winding down our fossil fuel usage in the state and ramping up renewables. So, right, we agree it potentially could be high, and what I was hoping to get across today is there are more impacts than just price and cost. We really have to look at the impacts globally of our decisions. Blue Planet's, our approach is let's just maximize the amount of renewables we can as soon as we can, saying yes to as much as we can, and building our grid around a system that enables that as soon as possible.
Ron, you want to chime in?
Sure. You know, we agree. We want to maximize the amount of renewables that we can integrate into the system as quickly as we can. I think the question, the way it's posed, is an either-or kind of question, and I think actually LNG complements the long-term benefit of renewables. I can cite studies, Harvard University and others, that talk about the benefit of natural gas in modern generation technology and complementing the variability of the renewables that we're integrating onto the grid today. So clearly the EPA sees that benefit. That's why their regulations are designed to move away from older coal and oil-fired plants on the mainland and toward newer modern gas turbine-like technology in the future.
All right, you'll get to weigh in on the next one, Murray. Sorry, let's move on to the next one. How much cheaper is LNG when you need to pay for infrastructure? Oh, good question, actually. You have Murray?
Well, I'm certainly not the expert, and I'll defer to the utility on the total cost of the infrastructure, but I will say that the model that I showed you guys included, in terms of infrastructure, it was mostly about fuel costs, but it did include the cost of the combined cycle gas plants, which according to the utilities PSIP, if you do the math, it's roughly about 3.2 cents per kilowatt hour that the combined cycle gas plants would add. So that was in the analysis that I showed you. And the cost of getting it to Hawaii was in the analysis I showed you, but anything else needed in terms of infrastructure in Hawaii was not, at least in the analysis that I provided.
Ron, go ahead.
The cost that I showed you on the slides was an all-in cost. That includes the infrastructure necessary here to actually use it in our units, but it also includes all the infrastructure necessary on the supply side, the liquefaction, the transportation, all of it, all in. So, so you could say that, yes, it is cheaper when you consider all that cost.
But isn't it true, though, that Hawaiian Electric has now chosen to go down one path instead of building out the infrastructure on land, according to recent public filings?
Well, it is true that we believe that we can build a supply chain that minimizes the on-island infrastructure, which, you know, when you consider the desire to make this a transitional type of fuel, makes a lot of sense. You know, if there's, for example, containers or even ships, they can be redeployed when we no longer need to rely on liquefied natural gas. You know, hopefully one day we continue to use biofuel, although it's more costly, but one day we hope to be at a place where we can produce whatever we need to operate thermal generation locally, and it can be renewable, whether that's gas biogas or whether it's a liquid fuel.
Right, with Pacific Biodiesel actually in the works to
Yeah,
fuel
they
one
are-
of your plants.
They are one of our suppliers today.
Yep. All right, next question. We got a lot of them, keep coming in. So if LNG is cheaper and is essential to save money to support grid investments, why has Hawaiian Electric delayed bringing LNG to Hawaii?
Yeah, I've talked to a couple folks about this outside of the panel, but you know, it's a complicated negotiation supply chain. It takes time, and we're focused. Our North Star is ensuring that we get the best cost for the customer. For us, the fuel is just a means to produce electricity. We're not in the gas business. We don't sell gas. It's just a pass-through cost. So for us, its primary concern is ensure that we get the best deal that we can pass on to customers when it comes to actually using the fuel to produce electricity. So it's taken a little longer. We've had to sharpen pencils, especially as the price of oil dropped. We continue to work and negotiate, but we're confident we'll get there.
All right, thanks, Ron. Next question. Jeff, you're on the spot here. Did the Blue Planet survey put any numbers to what premium consumers would be willing to pay for renewables over LNG?
Premium consumers. You know, we did ask a question. We've asked it 3 times over the last 5 years. If people are willing to pay more for a renewable energy future, and unfortunately, I don't have those right off the top of my head, but they exceeded usually 2/3 of customers were willing to pay a $10 per month premium if that meant accelerating our renewable energy future to 100% renewables within a decade. And you know, we thought that was interesting. Of course, surveys, you have to be careful. I mean, what people say in a survey versus, you know, what they're actually willing to pay, sometimes different. But you know, across the board, over the last 3 times we've asked the question, are people willing to pay more for renewables? They said yes. And I think that generally holds.
Any of you want to chime in on this, or next question? Without LNG, does it take longer to integrate more renewables? I guess Ron, maybe you want to chime in on this one?
You know, I don't know if it takes longer. I think it's probably more costly though, because the reality is, and we've been living this for the last 10, 15 years as we integrate more renewables, is that when you negotiate costs and prices, it's against whatever the lowest cost alternative is. So the choice you have is, is that lowest cost alternative going to be a more expensive oil, or is it going to be a lower cost natural gas? You know, we've seen the dramatic decline in solar prices to today where they're competitive here, even with natural gas prices. So we're confident that setting that bar at the proper place will drive the market to sharpen their pencils and provide us with lower cost renewables, which is what we want.
I like your pencil analogies, by the way. Next question. So without LNG, what do we use to get for flexibility to integrate more variable renewables? That's a good one. Murray?
So in the interest of fairness, I would have to point out that it's linked to the previous question as well. Gas plants do back up renewables better than oil plants do. We got to be honest about that. Gas plants do ramp up and down more quickly than oil plants do, or coal plants, or anything like that. So from that standpoint, gas can help renewables. A higher renewable percentage can probably be backed by gas and by oil. The thing that gives me concern, though, so before everyone is too shocked by me saying that, given what Ulupono is focused on with renewable energy, on the other hand, the thing that gives me concern is locking in for 30 years when those technologies that will make renewables not only cheaper but more firm could be within, say, 5 or 10 years. And so to lock in for 30 and then 5 years later you've got those technologies you've been waiting for and kind of go, oh, dang. You know, that's what kind of worries me a little bit. But in the short term, gas does back renewables better than oil. It's just the way it is.
I would just concur with what Murray said, with the caveat that it depends where you put the gas. if we're simply putting the gas in our existing Kahe unit, it's unlikely to pair as well as a combined cycle turbine. So if it's simply substituting fuel, we might not get those benefits. So it will require infrastructure investment in the right sorts of technologies to back up renewables. We also share we don't know what's going to happen in 5 or 10 years. And I think as a company looks at this disruptive technology, I mean, in the 90s, I know earlier there was the telephone industry comparison. In the 90s, with the disruptive threat of wireless, faster landlines weren't a solution. So we do have to prepare and anticipate that there are going to be significant technology changes, demand response, just intelligence on the grid, storage. I mean, we're bullish on storage being a big solution going forward, and that pairs even better with renewables than any fossil source.
All right, next question. Wouldn't it make more sense to spend more on renewables plus storage instead of new infrastructure? I think you kind of talked, both of you, all three of you talked about this, so I guess any one of you can jump in on this one.
I'll just make one quick comment related to the question about what premium are people ready to pay. I'm not sure what that number is, certainly, but a lot of things you can learn just by human behavior. And if you look at the way people act, people buy insurance policies. For health, auto, home, everyone buys insurance policies. And the one thing a finance guy will tell you is that from an expected value point of view, you're all making a bad decision because you're paying a higher total lifetime cost for your insurance premiums than you are if you just expose yourself to the cost of being in a crash potentially once in a while, or getting cancer, or having something horrible happen. You're actually financially expected to be better off if you have no insurance and just roll the dice. You really are. I mean, that's why insurance companies make money. So, but people don't do that because they're willing to pay a higher fixed price and not have to stay up at night wondering if they're going to, get a huge medical or auto or something other bill. So people are willing to pay a premium. The question is how high it is, and that's a fair question.
I would just add that, I mean, the way the question's posed, again, it's like an either-or type of question. The reality is, and going back to the slide that showed the decline in fossil fuel over many years, we need to operate thermal generation now and for the foreseeable future. Could there be a unforeseen disruptive breakthrough in the next 5-10 years? Yes, anything's possible. We don't see that on the horizon. And so when we look at what the alternatives are to fill that thermal generation gap over the next, whatever it is, 10, 15, 20 years, we think the lowest cost, cleanest emitting fuel that can be delivered here without with a minimal investment in on-island infrastructure seems to make the most sense to us. And it's also the way that we see as to keep the customer bill as low and as reasonable as possible. And that enables us to be able to make the grid investments necessary to modernize that grid to accomplish what we all want to accomplish, which is to get to that 100% renewable future as soon as possible.
Thanks, Ron. Now we'll move on to audience questions, get the audience involved here. So jump on your smartphones and tablets and get ready to answer these questions. So the first one we got here is, are you in favor of bringing LNG to Hawaii? So it looks like a little bit, 10% more of you are in favor of bringing LNG in. But that's just a broad question. There are other questions that'll add in, a little bit more detail. So I guess 46% are in favor of bringing in LNG. Jeff, did you get your vote in? You can still.
All my proxies are.
All right, let's move on to the next question. So it looks like, so if yes, which a majority of you said yes, Hawaii should import LNG because it will enhance our move to renewables, it's cheaper and more stable than oil, or it's basically just cleaner than oil. Looks like we got an even keel here with cheaper and stable. Who wants to tip the scale here? We can't end on a tie. Okay, we'll move on. We'll move on right. Well, hold on. Okay, we'll move on right now with enhance more renewables. Or Okay, next question. If you answered no, Hawaii should not import LNG because it continues dependence on foreign oil, it uses fracking, it will slow movement to renewables, or we should just stick to oil. Wow, looks like Jeff, you made a good point. You got across your fracking point with the football stadium. And so we'll move on to the next question. That one looks like a pretty decisive one. Uses fracking as if you voted no to that question. Okay, and last question here. If we import LNG as a bridge fuel, then we should pay the lowest possible cost, even though it will mean having a longer term infrastructure, or we should pay more, although less than oil, so that we build short term infrastructure, or you just can't decide. But that's definitely not the case here. So keep those votes coming in. Looks like we got pay less for long-term infrastructure, and yeah, we have a winner here. All right, thanks for voting. These are real good. Thanks, Jay, for incorporating live SIF. This is interesting stuff. Get a live poll. Don't need to hire a contractor like Jeff did for his poll. But so Jay will come up, and then we got some closing remarks, right, for the panelists.
Well, there's a lot of important questions for people to consider. We think that, and I'll just reiterate that why we believe that LNG is the right answer as that transition fuel for Hawaii. It's cleaner, it's going to reduce our emissions, it's going to make that, it's going to create the opportunity to invest in the grid, which is going to enable new technologies and more customer choice in the future. That's what we're trying to achieve. We think it hastens that future, not delay it. And so we're going to put forth a plan, and then folks will have a chance to review it and decide.
Thanks, Dwayne, and thanks, Ron and Murray. I thought this was a good discussion, and I was, sort of pigeonholed into this bad cop, role, because honestly, we might be on that undecided category up there. The thing is, we haven't seen a plan that really reflects our mission and what we've heard earlier, which is, I think, our mutual mission of moving as fast as possible to 100% renewable energy future, because that's where we want to be, and I think we all do agree on that. What I did want to raise is the real costs of the decisions that we make here and the consequences of our actions in Hawaii are real, and I think we have to acknowledge that. We have to question the narrative that it's cleaner, it's cleaner, it's cleaner, it's good for a climate. These are open questions, and until we really have those regulations in place, until we fully understand and appreciate the impacts of natural gas fracking activities, we just have to buyer beware. It's true that all energy resources are going to have impacts, but we are making a choice here to commit to this for some period of time, and so we ought to do it with our eyes wide open. What we want to see is getting as much renewables on the grid as soon as possible, and what that means is saying yes to customer choice and letting people put solar on the rooftops. It means saying yes to hundreds of megawatts of waiver projects. It means not vetoing a biofuel tax credit bill that could bring more biodiesel to the state. It means saying yes to everything now, clean energy, and then seeing what's left. What's that remainder, and is there room for a small LNG project that truly complements the transition, that hastens the transition instead of impedes the transition in any way? And that's what we have yet to see.
I'd like to echo, maybe follow my neutral role a little bit more here, both what Ron and Jeff are saying. It's a really, really big decision in terms of the amount of money that would go into the infrastructure and the 30-year sort of life of the assets. But to be fair, there are strong arguments that have been presented today, both for and against. And we need to carefully consider those. My goal here today was to change a little bit the nature of the conversation, because it's really not just clean or cheap. It's a lot more complex than that. And we need to do more work in terms of really looking at the probabilities that we end up in a good place or a bad place. There is no slam dunk 100%. You're better off all the time without question with any one choice. There's probabilities here. You got to estimate them. I'd say use energy price forecasts with a huge, taken with a huge grain of salt. Like I said, the EIA forecast I made in the year 2000 was off. We hit 3.8 times that price. And you say, well, that was Fukushima, that would never happen again. But those 100-year floods statistically happen every 20 to 30 years, not every 100 years. So just trying to raise, hopefully, the level of the discussion to really look at the true probabilities around this and make the best decision based on data and facts. And that's kind of where we want to end up on that.
All right, thanks, guys. I mean, I think the bottom line is that, we need to discuss this issue more and look at it from all points of view. And, Jeff, although, again, you mentioned the bad cop, we got to have that side to keep us honest and to look at these things, from the environmental perspective and, what's happening on the mainland. And obviously, Hawaiian Electric, I mean, done a lot of studying on this, and the state has done a lot of studies. Ulupono has done a lot of studies. And in the end, I mean, we all want to do what's best for Hawaii and the ratepayers and, make sure that, it'll be friendly to our environment. And, LNG may or not be in the future of Hawaii, but we just got to keep looking at it and debating this topic. But a round of applause for all of these three well-informed and great panelists. And Jay will have some closing remarks, and hopefully we'll get out here soon, right?
One round for all the three panels. And moderators. Okay, we've come a long way to the end of a very full day, covered a lot of ground. We presumably learned a lot. Good thing is there are a lot of committed people and leaders and people apparently want the same thing. We have provided this forum today, HEPF, to bring everyone together, to discuss, to understand, see the hope of some possible actions, and to begin or continue the work we need to do. So as for the forum, we have listened, we have heard, we will take the input and report on it. That is, report on it so you can get copies of it. We will actually distribute and disseminate the results of these votes, and we'll come up with initiatives for the coming year on it. The conversation's continuing. We hope you will stay and continue this dialogue in our courtyard. We learn more about the past. We're excited about the future. We hope you are too. There's evaluation forms, and they're really small. They're easy to fill out. We made them really easy for you to fill out, so please do fill them out. They're important to the forum as we move forward. We always want to do better. Please help me thank the sponsors, Hawaii Energy, Hawaii Natural Energy Institute, Hawaiian Electric Companies, Ulupono Initiative, Hawaii State Energy Office, Think Tech, and the UH Information Technology Services. Also to thank Cafe Julia, Meeting Sift, graduate students Christina, Ashley, Bill, Jason, and Maya, Stan Osserman, of course, Mike Hamnett, Jason Harada, and, of course, Sharon Moriwaki, who survived the preparation of this incredibly complex program. It really was good, Sharon. You did a great job, Sharon. Okay. Okay, the only thing more I got to say is see you in the courtyard. There's plenty there. Aloha till next year.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan.